Good evening, I'm Andrew Chang. Tonight, a presidential assassination in a country already on the brink.
Killing a president for political reasons is not part of the game.
Haiti in crisis, left without a leader. Who's in charge? What happens next? And the concern in this country.
It is absolutely unacceptable.
Also tonight, how climate change set the stage for a deadly heat dome and a devastating drought now hitting Manitoba.
We're in some challenging times.
Plus, CBC News investigates.
When is the government going to start being accountable and answer the questions?
What really happened before two scientists were fired from Winnipeg's high-security National Microbiology Lab? And one game at a time.
Go Habs! Go Habs!
We're with the fans in Montreal as the Habs try to keep the Cup dream alive. This is The National. There is fear and confusion in a troubled nation with close ties to Canada tonight after the shocking assassination of Haitian President Jovenel Moïse in his own home. Late tonight, the situation is evolving quickly and there have been reports of arrests, but that will not stop the country from plunging into political uncertainty. Gunmen stormed Moïse's residence overnight, shooting him dead and seriously injuring his wife. Haiti's acting prime minister has assumed control, but with his own term set to expire, there are questions over who even has the right to govern. And this is just the latest crisis for a country long besieged by chronic poverty, rampant crime, political upheaval, and natural disaster. Now, we begin with Katie Simpson with what we know about the rapidly developing situation inside Haiti so far.
Bullet holes scar a wall that was supposed to protect the president's home. Now an urgent investigation into the deliberate killing is underway, a crime plunging an already unstable country into even further disarray. Haiti's interim prime minister Claude Joseph called for calm and vowed to find those responsible. Unverified video reportedly from the scene captures someone shouting an operation by the Drug Enforcement Administration is underway.
DEA operations, everybody stand down. DEA operations, everybody back up, stand down.
Gunmen fired on the residence, killing the president and seriously wounding his wife. Haiti's ambassador to the U.S. says he believes the suspects posed as fake DEA agents.
It is a well-orchestrated attack, and those are professionals.
President Jovenel Moïse was not popular. He faced pressure to step down as critics said his term was up months ago and was accused of trying to expand his powers under the Constitution. That prompted protests and unrest at a time when gang violence and kidnapping surged. Thousands who felt unsafe fled their homes while the pandemic ravaged through one of the poorest nations in the world.
We're shocked by the tragic news from Haiti and want to express our deepest condolences.
From the World Health Organization to the United Nations, international leaders sharply denounced the killing.
We must ensure accountability for those responsible for the murder.
As did Canada's Prime Minister.
It is absolutely unacceptable and not something anyone wants to see anywhere in the world.
The U.S. has pledged to provide whatever support it can.
We need a lot more information, but it's very worrisome about the state of Haiti.
And so, Katie, there are some late-breaking reports about what is happening inside the country tonight. What do we know?
The news agency Reuters is quoting a police chief who is describing a dramatic operation to arrest suspects. At one point, at least 3 police officers were held hostage. They're apparently free now. The chief says 4 suspects have fallen, 2 have been captured, but obviously it's an evolving situation right now, Andrew.
All right, Katie Simpson in Washington, thank you.
Thanks.
Now, Canada is among those countries responding most urgently to the crisis in Haiti, condemning the assassination and offering any assistance it may need. Here's Evan Dyer on what comes next and reaction from Haitians here, nervously watching what is going on there.
It's a mess, she says, a total mess.
Bordel total.
It's nonsense. We're not moving forward. It's sad. Members of Montreal's Haitian community are used to bad news, but the latest from Port-au-Prince shocked the most hardened.
Of course, we've been having political problems, political violence for some months now. but Canadian president, for political reason, is not part of the game.
President of the Republic of Haiti.
Canada has deep ties with Haiti. Roughly 160,000 Haitians live here, and it's the biggest international donor after the U.S. Former Canadian Ambassador Gilles Rivard says Haiti can't catch a break.
Haiti has suffered. I've been through earthquakes, I've been through hurricane, I've been through cholera, and now it's COVID.
And we decided to put the country under the state of siege.
The immediate worry now, who's really in charge? Acting Prime Minister Claude Joseph says he is. According to the country's constitution, the order of succession passes power to the president of the country's highest court. But he died of COVID and will be buried tomorrow.
The president has just been assassinated. He had his supporter that will call for vengeance, for revenge. You have the opponents that will say, well, now it's time to do something that the president is gone. The Senate and the House of Representatives are not functional. This is why I'm not optimistic at all about the capacity of the country to fill the vacuum created by the assassination of the president. And I really wonder what's going to happen soon.
Okay, so Evan, you've reported from Haiti. What's your sense of the challenges there and the elections that were scheduled for September? Could they actually happen?
Well, President Moïse himself, Andrew, was in a dispute over when he had to face the voters, and the opposition said, in fact, that his mandate had already expired. And the Haitian National Assembly hasn't sat for 2 years because of a similar kind of dispute. So I don't think anyone would want to guarantee that elections in Haiti are going to go ahead on schedule, particularly during a pandemic. But there is an agreement to hold both presidential and legislative elections on September 26th. We'll see if that actually happens. Of course, if Haiti can form a legitimate government, it's still going to face tremendous problems.
All right, Evan Dyer, thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Let's turn to Canada's wildfire situation right now. In British Columbia, there's still about 200 burning, a third of them out of control. They've forced many people to either flee from their homes or prepare to at a moment's notice, especially around Kamloops, the biggest area under an evacuation order you're looking at there, threatened by the Sparks Lake fire. Many of the evacuees from that area have ended up in Kamloops, where, as Carolyn Dunn shows us, they now nervously wait to see what happens.
This is what Marshall Potts and Joanne B. Harrell encountered driving back to their ranch yesterday.
It's a dystopian future is what it looks like up there, it really looks devastating.
Take care, everybody. We're going.
The couple fled a week ago with the roar of the fire gaining on them fast.
All the trees were starting to candle, and it made it look like it was coming right at us.
They escaped with their 2 dogs, one of whom is pregnant, and Marshall's favorite guitars.
Some of our cows are right here.
Remarkably, they discovered yesterday, the fire stopped short of their cattle, chickens, and home. The Sparks Lake fire has grown to 40,000 hectares in 10 days. Its official classification, out of control.
When we get that call...
Nate Scotchman has been a firefighter for decades, but even he became overwhelmed as he and other members of the Skeecheson Indian Band fled for safety.
At first, I wasn't too worried because it was still coming over the mountain. And then, within not too many, minutes, went outside and there was a big mushroom cloud. It was red and, there was smoke everywhere.
Today, the fire was being held on 3 sides, but conditions are tinder dry and the wind can change on a dime.
Sometimes the winds will go up a valley and then change the other way on another day, and it makes it really difficult for the firefighters to allocate resources accordingly.
So Potts and B. Harrell have no idea when they'll be able to go back or what they'll find.
We might get lucky. We're hoping for a little miracle there and still have some trees left. It would be nice.
Okay, so Carolyn, I'm looking at your shot, and as we link up with you, I can see the rain coming down. That's got to be a good sign. But you tell me, what are evacuees telling you?
Well, the folks from Lytton are in mourning and they're devastated, traumatized really, from having fled this fire that took out their entire community and everything they own. As for the people from Skeetchison and the greater Sparks Lake area, it's really the unknown. They left a fire very close to their houses, and they just don't know what the outcome is going to be. Now, officials are saying we are going to need a significant amount of this kind of rain for a sustained period of time. And even though we're getting a little bit soaked right now, it's probably not going to be enough, and there's not enough in the forecast. Andrew?
Okay, Carolyn Dunn, thank you. Now, bus tours are being arranged for this Friday to take residents of Lytton, BC back into the burned out village. It will be their first chance to see the destruction in person, but they will not be allowed to get off the bus. The village is also restricting access to CN and CP rail, except for critical repairs and fire suppression. Now, this is new video into us, showing those dramatic moments as the fire tore through town a week ago. No definitive word on a cause, but some residents have blamed a train. Video of one surrounded by smoke has been making the rounds, but CN says they've investigated it. The company says the train in the video was near Boston Bar, not Lytton, and the smoke was from a different fire that was already burning. Now, these fires have fed on tinder dry conditions after a record-breaking heat wave. Today, a group of scientists linked that to climate change. And that heat dome has also settled over Manitoba, where farmers are now dealing with a drought so severe, some are considering pretty drastic measures. Cameron McIntosh explains.
In sweltering heat under the haze of forest fire smoke, those cows are getting thirsty. Tom and Cam Johnson come to this pasture in St. Laurent, Manitoba twice a day.
Probably just drank this dry this morning.
To fill up those makeshift troughs.
End of June, beginning of July, and our dugouts are dry. Never, ever seen that before.
No water also means no hay, so he's facing the bleak prospect of needing to sell his herd before he runs out of feed.
We're going to see how far we can go and then make those tough decisions this fall or later this summer if we have to sell.
It's not just St. Laurent. Much of southern Manitoba has received less than 50% of normal precipitation this year. The heat wave has only made things worse.
Grain and pulse crops are also suffering. Winter left little snow. Drought conditions were setting in before some farmers even got on the fields.
The next 3 weeks will probably tell how much will be there.
Bill Campbell is president of Keystone Agricultural Producers. He says some rain can still salvage the year, but it has to come quick.
To say we've never seen this before, I don't think would be right, but we're in some challenging times.
Beyond the farm, a group of climate scientists that analyzed the deadly heat wave in Western Canada found climate change played a major role, making it 150 times more likely to have occurred.
The heat wave itself, really would put the kind of exclamation point on a long-term drought.
Back in St. Laurent, local officials have declared a state of agricultural disaster, calling for provincial aid.
We're all hoping for rain because...
While the province works on an announcement, Johnson is using funding already allocated to help farmers dig wells.
We drilled 2 wells in 2 other pastures, which we, all my lifetime, never had to do before.
Now, all he can do is just keep filling those tires and watch the forecast, which for at least the next week is calling for more heat and not a drop of rain. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, St. Laurent, Manitoba.
Well, tonight, First Nations leaders from across the country are in the midst of an important election. The Assembly of First Nations is deciding who will be its next national chief. Olivia Stefanovic is watching the results, joins us now. So, Olivia, what can you tell us so far?
Andrew, we're awaiting third ballot results expected next hour. There are 4 candidates left in the running for national chief. After the last ballot, former Muskegowgan First Nation Chief Reginald Bellarose from Saskatchewan leads Ontario Regional Chief Roseanne Archibald by a razor-thin margin. Whoever wins, there is a lot at stake.
Demands for change met by promises of action.
We must seize this moment.
All of the front-runner candidates vowed to seek accountability following the discovery of hundreds of unmarked graves at former residential school sites.
Thoughts and prayers are no longer enough.
We have to be prepared as a country and as people that there will be more.
Outgoing National Chief Perry Bellegarde says he wants his successor to use the momentum of this moment.
Continue to advocate for investments to close the socioeconomic gap that exists So investments in education and housing and water and infrastructure.
But there are also calls for change within the Assembly of First Nations, for the organization to work more closely with the people they represent.
To retain or regain legitimacy in the eyes of communities, it has to do some work of, in some ways, making itself more of a democratic institution.
Roseanne Archibald or Jody Calahoo Stonehouse, if elected, could become the first female national chief.
First Nation politics is and has been for a very long time, centered around these male chiefs and with a certain style. I guess we'll find out in the voting to see whether or not chiefs have recognized the need for a different type of leadership.
The winning candidate needs 60% of support to become the next national chief. They will be part of negotiations with the federal government on key issues, such as implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. They will also have to establish a working relationship with all political parties as speculation looms over the possibility of an upcoming snap federal election and Indigenous issues expected to be front and center, Andrew.
Okay, thank you, Olivia. Well, the search for survivors at the site of that deadly condo collapse in Florida has ended. Officials are now calling it a recovery mission.
To share this news with the families this evening who are still missing their loved ones was devastating.
It has been 2 weeks since the disaster. Search crews have found 54 bodies so far, with 86 people still unaccounted for. 4 Canadians are among the victims. Only 1 has been identified. Tropical storm Elsa made its way across Florida today, pounding the state with wind and heavy rain. The storm's now moving further north, threatening to bring flash flooding to Georgia and the Carolinas. Well, it is going to be another nail-biter tonight for the Montreal Canadiens and an entire nation cheering them on.
Here we go, game number 5, and G. Gibbons will start at center for Montreal.
Here we go indeed. Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Finals is underway in Tampa. The Habs once again playing with their backs against the wall. They need to pull out another win tonight just to stay alive, and they won't have a hometown crowd in the stands to cheer them on. It's currently scoreless after 1 period. Now, Allison Northcott is outside the Bell Centre in Montreal. So, Allison, how are fans feeling where you are?
Well, this is a really dedicated and hopeful group of fans. Inside the Bell Centre, there are 3,500 people who can watch the game on large screens, but there are also people outside the Bell Centre as well, this crowd here, who are gathered to watch the game as well. There's a lot of energy, a lot of nerves as well, as they hope that the Habs can hang on and get another win tonight. Even though the Canadiens are playing in Tampa tonight, fans are at the Bell Centre in Montreal to cheer them on from here.
We're feeling great. Yes, sir. Yep, we're going to do it.
Even if they're not here, you know, the vibe is here. I know they know we're here.
Some clamoring to watch through the window of a sports bar.
We just want to support our Habs and with everybody and just enjoy the moment.
I'm crossing my fingers. I hope it's not the last one.
Tonight, another do-or-die game for the Habs.
We don't look at it as a daunting, task. We have 1 game to play tonight, and that's what we're prepared for. And
this is the best hockey I've ever had. It's so much fun. Everybody's been telling me to enjoy it.
After the Canadiens' dramatic overtime win on Monday, the crowd outside the Bell Centre went wild. But it didn't take long for police to shut down the celebration, using tear gas to disperse people. Montreal police say it was necessary after some in the crowd set off fireworks and threw bottles.
It's lazy policing.
This city councillor says it was overkill and something police should stop.
I've been getting lots of calls and emails from individuals who say, hey, people are coming out of the Bell Centre, had no idea what was going on, suddenly had to breathe in tear gas. Tear gas doesn't target those who might be causing the trouble. It's indiscriminate. It targets everyone.
He says police should use different tools that target troublemakers while allowing others to celebrate peacefully.
Okay, so Allison, you mentioned the police presence. Can you tell us what that's like there tonight?
Yeah, there is a really strong police presence out here again tonight. Groups of officers, you can see them really watching this crowd very closely. There have been issues with vandalism and violence after some playoff games in the past. That's obviously something they want to avoid. Police also sent out a tweet earlier today for fans reminding them that it is dangerous to set off fireworks in a crowd and that it could also get them a $650 fine.
Okay, Alison Northcott, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, soccer fans hit the streets on both sides of the Atlantic. Coming up, England fans celebrate a win they have never seen before. Plus, a new study shows a surprising number of young Canadians have had COVID. We'll ask the doctors if that should change the way we gauge risk with kids. And a mysterious cloud over 2 virologists with a connection to Wuhan, China, fired from a high-security lab in Winnipeg.
Why are they covering up information about scientists?
Former colleagues at the lab tell us what they saw. We're back in 2. Welcome back. The Ontario government says it will spend an additional $32 million annually to fight the opioid epidemic. Health Minister Christine Elliott says the money will be put towards addiction services, from prevention to recovery. It's part of the government's promise to invest nearly $4 billion in mental health and addiction services over the next decade. Opioid-related deaths spiked across the country last year. And Canada is not alone in seeing this disturbing trend. In parts of the United States, there's also been an alarming rise in overdose deaths throughout the pandemic. Farmer Ali takes us to Washington, where the crisis is disproportionately affecting Black Americans.
On one end, they sell PCP to the K2, to crack cocaine, to heroin, to marijuana. You can get basically anything in this neighborhood, you know what I'm saying?
Terrence Cooper's job, keeping people alive. He helps run this mobile medical clinic. Today, they're in Washington's Benning Heights.
These brown bags have supplies in them.
The team hands out life-saving Narcan, condoms, and exchanges used needles for sterile ones.
They want help, but they don't know how to get to the help. So that's where we come in.
And I just turned 64 the 18th of this month. And I've been using since I was 12.
Mello uses heroin and is one of their regulars. He comes by for sterile tools and a meal.
I don't use needles. I blow. But they're still good because they help me too, you know, by giving me advice on what to do and what not to do.
Data from the DC Medical Examiner's Office shows opioid overdose deaths rose in 2020 by 46%. The majority were black, male, aged 50 to 69.
There was a pandemic that layered itself on top of an opioid epidemic that was already prevalent within many of our communities. It highlighted a level of desperation that was already brewing beneath the surface.
It's a similar story in neighboring Maryland. Experts say in addition to the rise of fentanyl, in some black communities, there are fewer clinics and treatment can be expensive. There's also a lack of culturally appropriate care.
There's the stigma that we continue to deal with in the Black community, coming forward to acknowledge that you have a substance use disorder because of the historical war on drugs.
So the process is to engage folk in an effort to build those relationships with people right there in the trenches.
There's plenty of work to do in the trenches, digging out from the past year.
And one thing about being out here on these streets, man, having a sense of belonging to something or someone is very, very important. You know what I'm saying? Because it makes you want to get out. It makes you want to get better. It restores hope.
So much of restoring that hope starts with this RV, showing up every day. Farah Morali, CBC News, Washington.
Well, next on The National, a new study shows more kids caught COVID than we thought. So, as the rest of us get vaccinated and things reopen, we assembled the doctors for some advice. Stay with us. Welcome back. While the fight against COVID is far from over, the story does have some real bright spots today, even some things to celebrate, including a milestone in a province that has seen some of the worst of the pandemic in Canada. Ontario reporting no new COVID-19 related deaths today. The first time that's happened since October of last year. In Atlantic Canada, the picture is also looking bright. Both Newfoundland and New Brunswick reporting no new cases. And in New Brunswick, active cases have fallen to the lowest level in a long time, with just 10. Meanwhile, in New York City, the mood was something else. Thousands hit the streets for a ticker tape parade to say thank you to essential workers for pulling that city through the pandemic. So here's some food for thought. According to a new study from Canada's COVID-19 Immunity Task Force, in a sample of 10,000 Canadians, the age group with the largest prevalence of COVID-19 antibodies was kids between ages 1 and 19. But think about that. Kids 12 and under have never been vaccinated, and the results came from months ago before most of Canada was vaccinated. So what that tells us is that kids have been getting infected at a pretty alarming rate, even if that would rarely lead to severe illness or death. So what does that mean? Well, kids, when infected, often don't present as being very sick at all, but they can still transmit infection, of course. So as this country continues to reopen, social circles expanding, how should we understand the risk that they and we are taking on? Well, joining me now, Dr. Fatima Kakar, a pediatric infectious diseases specialist in Montreal. We'll try not to talk about the Habs tonight. And Dr. Lennox Wong, Chief Medical Officer at Sick Kids Hospital here in Toronto. We won't talk about the Leafs either. So, Dr. Wong, let me just ask you this. Are kids under 12 something of a blind spot here?
Well, Andrew, I don't think they're a blind spot to healthcare professionals. We've known all along that children under 12 do get COVID. And we've also known that they are not very symptomatic with COVID. And I think for members of the public, they may have conveniently thought that perhaps children don't get it at all. But from a healthcare professional standpoint, we've known this all along, and that's why we've given guidance in the past and currently around making sure that there's social distancing, making sure people are careful with who they're in contact with.
But okay, you make a really interesting point there about how convenient it has been sort of to let under 12s fly under the radar. Dr. Kakar, I mean, I'm a parent, right? When I see my kids playing with other kids at a playground, I don't think much of it because I feel like on the balance of things, it ought to be safe. But you tell me, I mean, what would you either add or change about that understanding?
I think it is important that everybody be reassured, and this study confirms that kids are not very sick from COVID. What it confirms is that kids are asymptomatic. So what this means is that if you're at high risk, if you're unvaccinated, if you're elderly in multiple conditions, or if you're poorly vaccinated, you only have one dose so far, you might be at higher risk, so you potentially should be more careful around kids under 12.
But, and then how would you make this sort of thought process practical? Because I'm thinking of, you know, like summer camps as an example, summertime activities, kids playing with each other. I mean, through what lens should parents approach those kinds of things?
So I think it is important that we let kids have their summer, socialize, go to camp, be with other children. What is going to change is within family dynamics. So for example, big family get-togethers where there's a grandparent and an under 5 who's at daycare. There is a level at risk, and I think that's where we want to be cautious to not completely go unmasked and really take those chances. So it's for kids themselves and within family dynamics where, for example, parents are fully vaccinated, they're young, they're healthy, there's really minimal risk. But if those young children are in an environment with older people who are at risk, that's when they still have to maintain those cautions. So it changes those inner family dynamics.
Right, and Dr. Huang, those precautions, I mean, so whether we're talking about you know, masking, physical distancing, those sorts of things, indoors, outdoors, what are the kinds of things that you would want parents to have front of mind?
Well, I think this has brought a heightened awareness of when you're symptomatic with any sort of illness. And so any child that's symptomatic with any sort of illness, we want them to be extra careful. We don't want them to be in contact with people who might be at risk. There's screening that is in place already at many of the day camps and overnight camps. I have young children who are planning on going to camp, and one who's in camp already. Adhering to those screening precautions is absolutely essential.
Dr. Kakar, is the heightened awareness right now, how much of that do we attribute to the Delta variant? I mean, is that what is throwing things for a loop right now?
No, it's definitely a concern, and the whole issue of under 12s not being vaccinated is raising this concern. Are they going to be a reservoir for the Delta and further variants down the road? And it really is quite possible because we can't just rely on their symptoms to test and to isolate these kids. So it is an area of concern, and I think it is important, and I'm glad you guys are bringing this up now, because what we're seeing is a surge of all these other viruses in children and young infants, for example.
Right.
And it's really because these isolation measures have been put aside. So it's a good moment to actually reinforce these.
And very quickly, Dr. Huang, in terms of a vaccine for under 12s, I mean, to my knowledge, there isn't a single one that's actually in the approvals pipeline right now for authorization here in Canada. So when would a vaccine come?
That's right, Andrew. We're very close, though. So the trials are underway for the mRNA vaccines. Those are the ones from Pfizer and Moderna. We expect to hear results from them probably in the late summer, early fall. And at that point, we can then embark on decisions around vaccinating children under 12 years of age.
Dr. Huang, Dr. Kakar, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And next on The National, the government won't reveal why 2 scientists were fired from Winnipeg's virology lab. Now, colleagues are speaking out.
You see people wandering around where they shouldn't be.
What we know about what actually happened, CBC News investigates. Next. So this was an extraordinary moment. The president of the Public Health Agency of Canada summoned to Parliament in order to be reprimanded. An extremely rare event. First time in 100 years that a private citizen has been called into the House of Commons to be publicly rebuked. It's all about the government's refusal to provide documents that could shed light about the mysterious firing of 2 scientists at the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg. The government is now suing to stop the disclosure of those documents, and there is still next to no information about why the 2 scientists were marched out of the lab with their security clearances revoked. Now, CBC broke the story and has been following it ever since. Tonight, former colleagues at the lab are speaking out, sharing new pieces of the puzzle and pointing the finger at the Winnipeg lab itself. Karen Pauls explains.
For months, opposition MPs have been demanding answers about these scientists and their Chinese students, escorted out of the country's only Level 4 lab in Winnipeg amidst an internal review and RCMP investigation.
When is the government going to start being accountable to this House of Commons and to answer the questions?
And they have a lot of them, about Dr. Jiango Chu's travel to Wuhan, China, where she was training staff and developing operating procedures at the new Level 4 lab there. As well, a shipment of viruses, including Ebola, that she sent to the Wuhan lab in 2019.
I'll ask the Prime Minister, why are they covering up information about scientists, about policies between our top secret Winnipeg lab and the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
But two former colleagues of Chu's are speaking out, saying all the speculation is wrong.
From her own words to me, she told me, like, this is a misunderstanding, and I don't know why, I was walked out of the building.
Gary Kobinger has been watching all of this with dismay and disbelief from his lab at Laval University. He was Chu's boss in Winnipeg. Together, they developed an Ebola vaccine that saved lives and won international praise.
This work can't be done without teamwork.
She's a very ethical person. She was a very loyal person at the time she was there.
Kobinger believes this all started over an intellectual property question. He says someone flagged Chu's trips to the Wuhan lab, concerned she was sharing proprietary information about biosafety protocols.
Sharing this, is it intellectual property? Really? Are you breaching the intellectual property because you're saying, well, on our side, the way we decontaminate this material is A, B, C, D. How do you do it on your side?
The Public Health Agency was also surprised to find Chu listed on 2 patents filed by Chinese agencies. The Winnipeg lab was not named, which means Canada would have a hard time getting royalties associated with any potential sales of the technology.
But is that enough to launch an RCMP investigation, strip the scientists of their security clearances, and ultimately fire them?
At NML? Yes, I would say. Knee-jerk reactions are what NML are famous for, especially with staff.
We're not identifying this former scientist of the National Microbiology Lab. He fears retribution from the Public Health Agency for speaking with us. Someone else is reading his words.
NML, they have a lot of problems they're trying to cover up.
There are questions about at least one of Chu's students and how he got inside the lab. Fai Hu Yan has affiliations to a research arm of the People's Liberation Army of China.
This could be something that fell through the cracks, without question.
One of those cracks, he says, shows a fault in the security clearance protocol. To fast-track lab access and avoid deep background checks, someone can apply for what's called reliability status instead of secret or top-secret clearance. Sources tell CBC News in some cases involving Chu students, limitations were placed on even that reliability access, limitations which were sometimes ignored.
I've worked at NML long enough that you see people wandering around where they shouldn't be. Generally, you'll send them to the lab, they'll do their work, you'll be in your office, and then they can walk around and do what they want.
Authorities we've spoken to about this are tight-lipped. The Public Health Agency says disclosure of any information to do with this case is prohibited unless authorized by the Attorney General or the federal court. CSIS never confirms or denies anything to do with its cases, and the RCMP won't talk about an ongoing investigation.
At the next stop sign, turn left. Chu and her husband Kiring Chung's whereabouts are unknown. When CBC recently visited their primary residence in Winnipeg, a young man answered the door.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
In a brief conversation, he would not confirm if the couple is still in Winnipeg, but told us he would reach them.
Yeah, I can relay your message, but again, no guarantees, right?
No guarantees the truth will ever be known, unless Chu comes forward to tell her story or those uncensored documents are revealed. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Well, next on The National, it's not just the Stanley Cup Canadian sports fans have on their minds these days. Tennis fans are watching Canada's rising stars taking center stage at Wimbledon. And more ecstatic cheers from English soccer fans waiting decades for this very moment. Stay with us.
I'm Jamie Poisson, and tomorrow on CBC's Daily News podcast Front Burner, Haiti's president has been assassinated, shot by gunmen in his own home. A deep look at what's known and the events that led up to the killing. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. A historic day on Wimbledon's grass. 2 Canadian men played in the tournament's quarterfinal. Only one of them made it to the semifinal, but as Jacqueline Hansen shows us, they are both inspiring a new generation of players.
12-year-old Aiden Malik is emulating an idol, doing the same training at the same Ontario tennis club where Denis Shapovalov practiced as a child.
I watched his videos when he was training here on these courts.
Today, tennis fans around the world watch Shapovalov play and win his first Grand Slam quarterfinal at Wimbledon, no less. Next, he takes on defending champion Novak Djokovic.
Well, obviously, he's the best player in the world, but, I think... But I think anything is possible.
The 22-year-old from the Greater Toronto area wasn't the only Canadian on the court today.
15 love.
20-year-old Felix Auger-Aliassime of Montreal was also playing in the quarterfinals at Wimbledon.
It's just nice to see that they've came from places like where I am right now.
Auger-Aliassime lost, so he's out of the tournament, but getting this far is still a career high for him.
I truly believe that both of them are going to be fantastic ambassadors to the game, one, but I also believe they're going to be great champions.
The two are among several Canadian tennis players getting attention around the world.
These Canadians, it's like they're supposed to be good at hockey, not tennis.
Bianca Andreescu's Grand Slam win in 2019 showed Canadians are more than capable, and Shapovalov, Auger-Aliassime, and Milos Raonic are all ranked in the top 30.
So that is just mind-boggling to think that we could ever have 3 players better than all the American players, with all the players they have, all the resources they have and everything.
Their success on the global stage is also having an impact locally.
Tennis in general is growing in Canada because of what's going on at the pro level.
And inspiring a new generation of players.
I'd definitely go pro someday, just like Dennis or Felix.
Because they're proof it's possible. Jacqueline Hansen, CBC News, Richmond Hill, Ontario.
Well, after a lengthy battle outside the ring, one of Canada's top boxers has officially punched her ticket to Tokyo. Mandy Bujold was ruled ineligible for this summer's Olympics by the IOC after missing previous qualifying events because of her pregnancy. The 33-year-old appealed the decision and came out with a historic victory last week. Today, she was officially named to the Canadian Olympic boxing team, making her the first woman to box for Canada at consecutive Olympics. Now, England is celebrating tonight after a historic victory on the soccer pitch. The Three Lions beat Denmark at their first Euro Cup semifinal in 25 years. And now it's all about Sunday's big final. As Salima Shivji shows us, a country daring to hope.
The excitement barely contained, the anticipation building.
We've been waiting for so long, we just want it to happen.
We've never obviously got to a Euros final and it's just everything. Yeah.
It's coming on! It's coming on!
Fans here daring to dream that England will make the Euro final for the first time ever. It would be the team's first trip to a major tournament final in more than half a century.
Starting is there!
England came out strong. Fueled by hometown cheers at Wembley, 66,000 allowed in as COVID restrictions slowly fade away.
In comes the captain!
Coming into this game, the English team was unbeaten, harkening back to the last time they got this far in the mid-90s. When this rallying song took over, an attempt to banish decades of near wins. Only it's a notion their Danish opponents scoffed at.
Has it ever been home?
It hasn't. 25 years ago, a crucial penalty shot missed by Gareth Southgate. He's now the team's manager and savoring every moment of this run.
The opportunity to, bring happiness and create brilliant nights for our fans, our nation, is a very special one.
The sting of defeat is all too familiar for the England side. But after one of the world's strictest COVID lockdowns, this year felt different for these fans.
There's just a real sense of the country stepping out of the coronavirus crisis as well. And so it's been a very cathartic experience for everyone, I think.
Relief on the pitch, too. England's captain clinching the win in extra time. The whole stadium and much of the country now finally reveling together in good times, unable to contain the thrilling feeling that just maybe they'll win it all this time around. Salima Shivji, CBC News, London.
Okay, up next, you know the saying, it's just like riding a bike? Well, in our moment, proof that you can keep that skill going for quite a while.
We have 10 that are nonagenarians, the oldest one being 99 and still cycling.
The community he has created is next in our moment.
and the truth must be told.
I am third-generation residential school survivor.
You have to fight your way through.
What is forgotten is often repeated.
The future belongs to the children. Every child matters.
Ray Marentet has been riding a bike since he was 9 years old, and he's not planning on stopping anytime soon. Turns out, he's not alone. Ray's found an entire community of cyclists in their 80s and 90s, and the group he formed is our moment.
I didn't know anybody else that was in the 80s that were cycling together. So I posted it on Facebook, and within 24 hours, I got my first one. We're up to 551 worldwide cyclists. You had to be 80 or plus. We have 10 that are nonagenarians, the oldest one being 99 and still cycling. It is a whole world of cycling that I've never been exposed to before. It encourages us to get out and cycle more. It encourages us to keep going no matter if we're on a recumbent bike, because some of these individuals tell us that they couldn't walk a city block, and yet they can cycle 50 miles, not kilometers, but miles. And it just blows me away. And now they realize you're never too old to cycle.
Well, that's great. Way to go, sir. And you know, just a heads up, in case you are, I don't know, in your mid-70s and you're thinking, hey, this sounds like a club for me. He was serious about, you know, the rule. You've got to be 80 plus. I mean, it's actually called the Royal Academy of Octogenarian Cyclists. So, well, hey, you just got to wait your turn. I'll be there soon at some point. That's The National for this July 7th. Have a great night.